Hello, today I'm talking with Michael from Global Merces, and we're going to be talking about corporate fund structures. Michael, can you give me a definition of what a corporate fund structure is?
Yeah, no worries at all, Monty. Well, corporate fund structure is, as the name suggests, a structure. It's a structure of an investment or a managed investment scheme or a vehicle that is set up according to, it's quite a number of variables. So it's a structure designed and is regulated by, depending on the type of industry you're involved in. In our industry of managed investment schemes, we're regulated by ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. They govern how we set up these structures. So we've got to make sure that when we do set up these structures that it's legal and it's compliant. So, and that includes all the governance processes, like from end to end of how an investment scheme is managed. So the structure includes the main one is the licensee. So if there's a product that requires a license to manage, then as on top of that structure, you would require either a responsible entity or a trustee to manage the overall assets of the fund. And then you've got the fund itself, which is a managed investment scheme, which is a pool fund where investors pool together their portion of the money they want to invest in, and the fund goes out and acquire the assets that the fund aims to target.
Now,
and then,
sorry to interrupt you there, Michael.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm getting together with other people, and we're pooling our funds to invest in this corporate fund structure. What kind of assets can a corporate fund hold?
The assets that the fund can hold depends on whether the licensee is legally allowed to target. So there's quite a number of different types of asset classes out there, and the categories can include cash. The simplest form is cash, which includes bank deposits, term deposits, savings, check accounts, cash management accounts, etc. So that just goes in the bank and it sits there and earns interest. Right? That's the simplest way to make, a conservative amount of returns. And then you've got fixed interests, which includes government bonds, corporate bonds, mortgages, and securities, hybrid securities. And then there's also property. Property residential, property investments can be developments or long-term. So we can have a fund where we can buy assets. We can buy commercial assets, or even residential assets, and we sit on that for a period of 5, 6, 7 years, and investors can earn revenue from rental, gain from these assets, and subsequently maybe a sale down the end of the track there. They sell the property and any sort of capital gains. They can split these profits or returns amongst investors. And there's equities. Equities is your typical stock exchange, share markets, etc. So they're the main sort of categories of assets that can be managed.
Now, these all sit inside a corporate fund structure, and then you talked about, the funds and the scheme and all of that. It sounds like it's quite a complex and multiple layers that build up this thing. Is that true?
That's very true. As I mentioned earlier, that the regulators who look after the legislation in terms of managed investments have put together. It's one of the highest regulated industry in the country, and one of the reasons for that is it's aimed to protect consumers and investors. So they want to make sure that there's no operators out there who manage investment schemes and take investors' money and in one of, I suppose, a looser example is go to the casino and put on black and hopefully it returns black. So the whole idea of the regulation is to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that's why the corporate structure is so complicated, to make sure that there's lots of governance and lots of compliance and lots of reporting back to the regulators and to our investors. There's people out there who thinks, let's go and get an Australian financial services license and we'll run our own managed investment schemes. It's not as easy as that. If it was, every single person will have their own license and they'll set up their own scheme and they'll go and get investors' money and go loose with it. So, and that's not the case, and that's why there's not many licenses that are on issue out there to do that, because it's very regulated.
So Michael, you mentioned everything in there from cash on deposit to bonds to property, residential or commercial, to equities, and most of those things as an investor myself, I kind of understand. But what I don't understand is corporate fund structures. So what are the considerations, or what are your top 3 tips that I need to be looking at in addition to the assets under management, but the management? What are the key points there for the corporate fund structure that I need to be aware of and be looking at?
Yeah. So one of the components of the corporate structure is, and I'll just quickly go through just some of the key structural points that are essential. Is as I mentioned, you need the trustee, the responsible entity or the trustee, which is Globe Merces is that. You need a custodian. Custodian is, in many cases, can be a bank that is vested with the authority to look after the assets. It's an independent, outsourced provider that looks after the assets of the fund. Globe Merces does that in-house as well with wholesale funds. We are our own custodian. And we separate these assets by trust accounts, bank trust accounts. We set it up so that it protects investors' either money or assets. And then you also got the fund administrator and unit registry. So they're the people who looks after investors' details, register them, allocating the number of units that the money, relative to the money they put in. So that's the broad sort of structure, and within those structures is when there is a managed investment scheme, we have to produce what is called an offer document. If it's a retail product designed for mum and dads, we're required by ASIC or by the Corporations Act to produce a product disclosure statement. Now, we all hear about PDSs for insurance products, for super products, for quite a broad range of even mortgages and all that sort of stuff. There's PDS's documents for these sort of services, same as a managed investment scheme. So the PDS, what investors should look at is within that PDS, make sure that the PDS sufficiently outlines the investment strategies, who's going to do what, the fees, the costs, and make sure that the corporate profile of the company that's going to look after the corporate fund structure is sufficiently resourced and qualified to make these investment decisions.
Now, Michael, you snuck in there, and I'm glad you did. Bottom line stuff. So, at some point, when I hear you speak, I'm hearing all this compliance and legislation and reporting and documentation. Is there a range of reasonable, is it a percentage funds under investment? How is this all? How is it costed out, and what's the bottom line? Or do I need to have $500,000 or $1 million to even play in this market?
No, it depends on the product. Again, it boils down to if it, like I mentioned, retail and wholesale. So retail is what we refer to the mums and dads, people who don't have a lot of money but has enough or a little bit, and they want to invest in certain investment schemes where they can sit on it for a year or 2 years and get a return that's greater than probably what bank interest offers. So what we do is in our offer document, we will outline what the minimum contribution amount would be and what the expected return would be. There's no guarantees. There's no guarantees in any investments, and if anyone who says that, then they're either footing the balance, the shortfalls out of their own pocket, or it's totally inaccurate. So we all aim at a target, and we outline our strategies of how we hope to achieve this target. And it's all outlined in the offer document. So, for a retail product, a minimum investment can be $5,000. Or again, it depends on the product. It can range, but generally, from what we've seen, it's minimum about $5,000, and it can go up to as high as you want to put in. Whereas a wholesale product, which is designed for our sophisticated market, high net worth, people who have investment experience, successful business people, or people who've got a lot of financial backing, we usually start that at $500,000.
Right. And what kind of fees are we talking to for the administration of a corporate fund?
Yeah, well, fees, again, will vary on the product type and the sophistication of the design of that corporate structure. So it depends on the type of product. We can, as I mentioned earlier, is you've got your own core structure that I explained before, and as it gets more complicated, we may need to engage an external service provider, which means, say for equities, for stock market shares and all that, we may need to engage a broker. We may need to engage a investment officer who may have to make these investment decisions and strategic decisions, etc. So we may incur costs to engage these additional outsourced providers. And these costs, there's two types of costs when you're talking about a managed investment scheme. You're talking about a direct investor cost. Generally, the direct investor cost is just the advisor. So if they've got a financial planner who's referred them to the fund, they might get a commission out of that, in which has to be disclosed. So they might get that, or there may be an entry or exit fee. The rest of the fees and charge for running a scheme, we will take it out of the asset of the scheme. So it's not taken out of an individual investor. So what that means is, there's a pool of $5 million in the fund, and there's fees for managing the fund. Then those fees will come out of that $5 million, out of the pooled assets, not one or two investors. It comes out of the pool. All our fees are required to be disclosed, and it's all spelt out. So, and that's why it's important for an investor to look at the PDS. The fund structure is set out in there, and fees and all that is part of all that, the fund structure and the corporate governance.
Right. So it pays me to read my documentation.
Correct. It's a big document, and as I mentioned to you, is it's highly regulated, and the aim of the regulation is to protect investors from anything that potentially could be misleading. So an offer document, or PDS, it can range between 40 pages up to about 70 pages right. On average. So it's quite a big document, and that's the reason for that, is it needs to outline all the corporate structure and all the strategies and the fees and costs. It virtually has to disclose everything an investor needs to know. That's why it's such a detailed document.
Well, thanks for that, Michael. If somebody needs to get in touch with you or they've got questions, because this is a complex area of investing and the structures that are bound around it, what's the best way to get hold of you?
The best way is our website, is jump on the Global Merces website. So it's just www.globalmerces, that's MERCES.com.au. All our details and contacts are in there. You'll find that when you look at the website, it's quite impressive. We do have very good, we're very well resourced, very well equipped in terms of technology and staff and experience to provide what I call a bespoke end-to-end funds management solution. So we provide everything, as I said, from start to finish. Someone can come to us and say, hey, I want to start a managed investment scheme in property. How do we do it? We will guide them through that whole process, explain them the corporate structure, how we would set it up. We work with our legal team to seek advice from them on how we can set up to make sure it is legal, because it has to be legal and it has to be authorised, and the licence has to have the necessary endorsement or approval by ASIC to be able to cope with that particular asset class. So globalmerces.com.au. We can provide any answers to questions you may have if you're starting out on this new journey.
Great. Thank you for that, Michael. I appreciate your time today. Look forward to chatting in the future.
No worries. Okay, thanks, Monty.